two, three.
Hi, I'm Gary David. Welcome to Experience by Design, the podcast where we explore experience designs of all kinds. Hello, EXDers and experience designers everywhere. Hope you're all doing well. I wanted to start out chatting about something which might seem a little counterintuitive, given that it's the summertime here and it's really hot. But I've started helping out with coaching Nordic skiing junior athletes, which has been a pretty fun journey towards getting a coaching certification as part of the USSA, or the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Association. As part of this, I've been working with some athletes on weekly training runs. And I'm a runner, so I like running. And it's been really fun to work with them around trail running and things like that, especially as the weather's been very nice, although it's getting kind of humid out there. This has also given me the chance to catch up with a friend and a training partner who is helping out coaching and who also happens to be a very accomplished scholar at a neighboring university. After a run yesterday, we were just sitting around in the parking lot chatting, as you do after a run, about our work and about our summer plans. Contrary to popular belief, we don't have the summers off. And he told me about an interesting project he is starting up. It involves looking at how many universities around the world are launching programs in entrepreneurship, and my school's no different. And he's also interested in looking at how entrepreneurs are portrayed in popular culture in different cultures, in different countries around the world. So we got to talking about it, and also this conversation got me thinking about the nature of entrepreneurship in all of its forms. After all, Google was started as an entrepreneurial effort, and so is Apple and Microsoft. The list goes on of major companies that started out as small businesses between people or by a person who had an idea and was taking a risk, taking a chance to start up this company. I'm not sure these examples hold a lot in common with another kind of entrepreneurship, which is local businesses that were started by someone who wanted their own business. And so they open up something in your town or my town or somewhere as a business as part of their entrepreneurial effort. But at the other hand, maybe they have a lot in common. I mean, there are differences in the final scale, but those differences of scale obscure the shared feelings of anxiety when starting out. I mean, it's got to be anxiety-provoking to start your own business. I've known people who had very successful corporate careers only to leave those to start their own consulting businesses, for instance. I've also known people who left similar careers to open other things like restaurants. People are drawn to being their own boss for a variety of reasons, but in every case, one of the things that can determine success in a company's growth is how effective a leader you are. And whether you want to be or not, when you start your own business, you are a leader. Today in Experience by Design, I welcome Reed Nyffler to the show. Reed is a lifelong entrepreneur who has founded a number of different companies. This includes Signal, which is a security company, FilterGo, an HVAC filter replacement company. Remember, during COVID, the importance of HVAC filters, and Frame Brand, a development company that helps franchise brands scale more effectively. He is also the author of 2 books. His first book, Transform Through Purpose, Your Path to Living an Authentic and Intentional Life, as well as his new book, Lead Exponentially. In his new book, he explores themes around authentic and empowered leadership, creating environments, and examples that will live on for generations. In our conversation, we talk about how his sociology minor, that's a very important factor, is one of the key things in his success, especially in decision-making and leading people. Reed relates his experiences working for Black & Decker and DeWalt Power Tools and how too much choice can lead to customer confusion. He shares how, as part of FilterGo, they came up with Gusty, this brand character behind FilterGo, and the intention being to have something fun and playful, which could stand out against more conventional and boring branding. Finally, we talk about the role of creativity in business and education, highlighting the importance of risk-taking in American culture as an essential element in economic success. It was a really fun conversation around sociology, of course, culture, entrepreneurship, brand, and leadership. Hope you enjoy it. When I was looking at your background, of course, the first thing I came up with is you're one of those people who overachieve by completing college in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason? I did in 3.5 years, but I don't know if you had a particular reason of why you felt like you need to be on the expedited schedule of, I got to get this thing done.
Well, first of all, I don't do boredom well.
Okay.
So I think when I went back to college, when I was just getting started, I went to the first semester and I realized, wow, this is a lot of stuff I learned as a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
And then I didn't see the complete applicational relevance. And the other thing that was important to me was maintaining my pace. I'm a big believer that if we slow our pace down, we never really pick it back up. And so, I think when I was in high school, I was busy, active in sports, working, et cetera. And I see a lot of people. In fact, my second year there, I was on academic scholarship floor as an RA. And I saw these 4.0 students that were, near perfect ACT scores. And then they went to 12 credit hours a week. And they actually failed because they were just not, our brains were not, our bodies were not, our lives were not engaged enough. And so I felt like high engagement was critical. And so in fact, I thought, well, if I'm going to be here, I'm not going to waste a year of my life, just waiting out the same courses that'll be available the year before.
Right.
And so that's part of it. And then my girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, was a couple of years older. And so there was that added incentive. But more importantly, that was well before I, knew that I was going to marry her directly. And so I took 24 credit hours a semester. In fact, early when I was in college, they had the first online courses when I was in college. And so that I realized self-study was an ideal. I think the other thing in this, it kind of ties into general understanding, is I would loop together classes that were all the same to use similar content. So communication was my major.
Right.
So I'd have a creative writing class, a creative communication presentation class, et cetera. So the content was all the same. And so I think it was really a matter of that mastering that pace, because we're a byproduct of our daily activities. And if we have low daily activity, guess what? We're making limited progress. So
I'm kind of surprised they let you take that many credit hours. I mean, were people kind of going to you and saying, hey, Reed, we're worried, or is this too much?
I had to get a signature from not only the administrator, but also the college dean to confirm that I could take that many credit hours. And they looked at my grades and they looked at my participation and saw that it was fine. But more importantly, and this was interesting at the time because college loans were just becoming a thing at the time. I'm like, stretch this out to 5 years. And I was sitting there and I remember sitting there and playing, of course you want me to stretch out to 5 years because you get another 20% in revenue over 4 years.
Right.
So if it's $10,000 a year, whatever the number is, now you get 50,000 instead of 40,000 because they're making a ton of money off room and board and everything else. And so, and of course, then they're like, right after that, college tuition skyrocketed, right? So I think even as I was there, the credit hour increase went up by 50% in 2 years afterwards because they could get these loans and they just kept driving it. So I saw the system that it was, and I knew that I would be learning by application, not by absorption. And so I wanted to take the information that was relevant, graduated, and applied it to my career, which ultimately led to starting, the business. So,
and why communication as a major?
While I was sitting there, I thought, what is something I'm going to use forever? Right.
Yeah.
And so I could have easily been in marketing, for example. Well, think of how marketing has evolved in the last 25, now 30 years since I graduated college. However, one thing, even as I'm doing now, I'm still communicating. So I thought, what's a long-term, and what really stood out to me, in fact, since we're going into my college career, there was really minors that were relevant and important too. So communication was my major.
Right.
My minors were English, sociology, and economics, and all of which are super critical because they didn't necessarily align. And I kind of backed my way into that because 12 credit hours, if you got a dual minor, it was 12 credit hours. If you got a single minor, it was 18. So I thought, I get to take 2 less classes to qualify as a minor. You know what I mean? So that's what I ended up doing because they were part of your required curriculum. But that communication was important because I knew, one, I had a natural inclination to that, but two, it was something I would always do. And it was super foundational for me to understand the value and circumstance, body language,
Right.
voice intonation, and how to structure a content and type and write and all those other things that we do on a recurring basis that share our thoughts. So that's why I chose that, knowing I would always do it and build on that skill set I was starting with, and really understood the philosophy of communication.
Well, it makes all the sense in the world. I was just talking with some people and looking at some material. And, there was a time where it was just go to college and get a degree. It doesn't matter what you major in, just make sure you get the degree. And then it was make sure you go into STEM. Well, now STEM fields actually have been declining, and STEM majors have been declining because opportunity isn't there as much.
Right.
The idea of learn how to code. And then now it's like no coding jobs are available. So we're kind of getting back to what are the key crucial skills that you need as a young person that no matter what, however the markets swing, these are still essential skills that will translate across whatever it is you might be doing.
Yeah, and I would say in this age of AI, authenticity is critical, and authenticity is through communication, right?
Right.
And actually, if you look at the next generation, to your point, that is entering the workforce, they haven't had live communication. Right, they're communicating through a platform, a phone, or and a lot of that's aided by AI. They're typing it, and even voice to text, among other things. And so the people that, if we can go and in any interaction, if we can talk, finally, thank you for listening well, and I had active listening skills that I developed in college, and thank you for listening to me, client. Right, or whatever, and those are the things that are super critical, valuable tools that were in college, and curriculum's getting away from that. They're specialized skills that aren't all that relevant, right? Any lawyer will tell you they didn't learn anything about law in college; they learned in practice at the firm about their practice. So, same thing applies here. So, I think a general knowledge base and how to be a working professional is more valuable than any technical training that we might get in college.
Well, it goes back to the idea of application, which is, is also going to your major. And this is one of the things that a lot of small liberal arts schools are wrestling with, is how do we maintain relevance in a space where we need to be creative in how we position what you're learning to what you can do with it. And I know as a sociologist that sociology has had a hard time articulating that well, because the professors who are teaching it aren't the ones who are using it in the ways that they're trying to instruct. And I'm fortunate to work at a business school where I can show that direct line, right? I'm like, here's an example of how you can use this in a place. And I've talked to so-and-so, and this is what they told me. Whereas in most colleges and universities, they don't have that opportunity to, how do I use this?
Yeah. And in fact, I'm speaking at universities, many times throughout the year. And that's one thing I think that the practitioners need to go back into the universities and partner with the teachers.
Right.
And so I think it's a combination of both, because when I was at a university, I saw the philosophical or theoretical approach, and then I had the opportunity to go apply it and say, okay, this is highly relevant. That seems there's like an item on the syllabus for the teacher, but it's highly relevant, and you're doing it to get a grade, but do it for the sake of application, not a grade in this instance. However, they get clouded with the 80% or 90% that is for the sake of the grade they may never use again. And so, really, trying to add the validity to what is being taught is critical. And, obviously speaking to these 20-year-olds, they're thinking, I'm never going to use this, or they've just become apathetic, right? Like, I'm just here to get my degree and move on, instead of what's the useful application. And I think, conversely, if higher education is on the other side, I think stating a purpose for the curriculum is super, super critical, and an external application. And I would do that day one if I were a sociology teacher. And, I am, my minor was sociology, one of them. And it is the most relevant minor of the three I had. I was going down that path: English, economics, and then sociology. Why? Because I study people. Right. And I'm building products that the masses will appreciate. Right. Because if I'm doing it, and many people they study themselves, right? And I had this conversation earlier this week, and I said, if you and your purpose, because my book Transform Through Purpose aligns with this, and people would say, where do I practically start? And I would say this: if you were to stop thinking about yourself for a full week, you didn't think about yourself for 1 second, who would you think about? That's where your purpose is going to start. Right. That's sociology. If it's not you, who do you think about? Your family? Right. Your friends, your employer. If you weren't thinking about everything you wanted, you needed, and who would you think about? And your purpose is there. And guess what? The people you're thinking about are probably the people you're going to serve best. Right. And so then that's where sociology comes in. If you're thinking about those people, where do they live, work, and play? Right. How do they conduct their day-to-day habits and lives. What's their ideology? So I travel, I've been to 60 countries, and that's the first thing I do is really a sociology study.
Right.
I go there and I say, okay, now first you're studying the people, but more importantly is, and this is what I would, communicate in an environment like that curriculum and say, what led to them operating this way?
Right.
What were the leadership decisions decades earlier or geographical decisions, right? So, I had an opportunity to go to Greece. And when I was in Greece, there was a big shipping container company, and it was John F. Kennedy, Onassis.
Right.
Onassis. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. Then I realized, wait a minute, this is a series of islands. So, and it's centrally located. So geographically, it made the most sense for him.
Right.
And so then he became the first one to really navigate that because they were on islands, so they had better shipbuilders. And then he was going to the island, so they just started transporting their goods back and forth to the different parts of the Mediterranean there. And then pretty soon he started going up and got bigger ships to go up to the UK and all these places. Now he becomes the world trade, right? I mean, it's just, then you realize, okay, now no wonder there's Greeks, small island, but you see Greeks almost everywhere in the world, right? I mean, you realize it's a lot of it is driven by the conditions of the marketplace, and their personality was transported because of the way they operated versus the others. And so those are the things that are super interesting. And of course they had conquered, the Greeks had conquered a lot of areas as well, and they opened those shipping lanes. So that's how sociology. So I sit here and think as a leader, I'd say, okay, what are the decisions that I'm doing that'll drive our culture hundreds of years later,
right,
that we'll be known for? And those are the things that lead to my decision making. So if I'm sitting in sociology, that's why I study people in college.
Right.
Because the better I understand people, the better leadership decisions I can make later in life as a result.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll just clip that and just give it to my students when they say, why study sociology? I'm like, listen to read. And one of the deeper elements, and I want to talk about the book, but I also want, because you have a lot of, irons in the fire, is the idea of brand. And I saw, looking at your background, that you worked with one of the legacy brands I consider a legacy brand, which is Black & Decker.
Yeah.
And that, I don't have a question, but I grew up associating it with tools, but then they were making toasters. And then I started thinking about is it a really good tool, but is it a toaster? Is it a coffee maker? And for me at least, it confused me in my mind of where I put it, because it seemed like it went in different directions.
Well, we'll take that a step further, right? If you look at branding, and I studied this and understood it as making a decision. Black and Decker were two different people. Al Decker, I met Al Decker.
Okay.
He was originally founding person. They were family legacy names, just like Henry Ford. I'm sorry, Gerald Ford was the president. Henry Ford. Every business, their brand was their name.
Right.
And so that was very European, because they were skills, they were trade, right? I mean, the apprentice program, in fact, any Smith or last name Smith is usually around the production of their family, and they couldn't, when they were in Ellis Island, get that captured. So they became a Smith because they couldn't find their names. And John's son, if you go to Iceland, all the son, that's a really legacy is associated with name and the credibility of your family. Right. And so people would name their companies of that because essentially that's what it was known for, right? Many towns in Nebraska where I live are named based on the family that originally settled it. So your brand was your physical name. Right. And the majority of predating 1900s, the names of organizations are actually someone's name.
Right.
And so that was Black & Decker. So then when they had a quality associated with a name, their branding was apply that quality or that name to everything, including toasters. And so in a study of branding, when I started there, I actually was launching the DeWalt Power Tool.
Okay.
They had that problem, right? And in the 90s, that was my first job. They took the Black & Decker professional tool, and literally all they did was change the color and the name. Same tool, color.
Interesting.
Name. Toyota and Lexus, right? They took that from there. That was the case study they were showing when they did that. And Toyota basically had a premium brand, which was Lexus or became Lexus, and they segregated and they began to take off because. And we see this in today's branding. And again, it's a study of sociology. And maybe I'll say it this way, when you add more choices, you are confusing the consumer. And that's sociology, right? That's understanding.
Right.
And I'll give an example. Everybody says, do you know why? And maybe I'll ask you the question, Gary, why all barns are red?
Why is that?
Because it's the only color available. right?
Oh, okay.
I use a story. I remember moving into my first house in the late 90s, and my wife said, go paint the garage white. And so I literally go get garage white, right? I moved into another house about 10 years later, and she's like, go paint the garage white. I get garage white. She goes, wrong white. I'm like, what are you saying? It's literally garage white here. And then you go, and there's like literally 250 options for white. I mean,
right.
I couldn't discern. If you pulled one off, I wouldn't be able to tell one versus the other different, but clearly there's a ton of choices. And people are frozen now because they have too many options. And I think that is a matter of sociology. So as a business, you look at the ones that are accelerated and growing. They have a very simple business model. It's easy. I mean, Raising Cane's is a great example of that, right? Because they only have two options, fries and chicken tenders. How many? I mean, that's it. I mean, that's it. And In-N-Out Burger, right? I mean, think of all the brands that take off. And so the sociology would say, simplify it and you'll get consumers. And so that's, again, something that I say as a leader. We try to make things super complex, but we want to make it simple to get consumers.
Apologize for the dogs barking, but one of the things, I was just talking to a company and they just dealt with this, which was our former CEO tried to build too many things too quickly and diluted what it is that we do and who we were. And there's a really nice book called The Paradox of Choice, that having more choices doesn't necessarily mean that you're making things easier, actually making it harder.
That's exactly right. And I think, from that perspective, 100% agree. And so as a leader, right, we want to, and this is the really conundrum. They want choice, but limited choices. Nobody wants to be dictated to, especially in America, right? We want to have a choice and we want to have relevant choices, but not too many choices. And so that's the 3 to 5 number choices that we should consider, is how many choices are a relevant amount.
So going back to this notion of too many choices, it's interesting that with your own companies, that you have like 3 different brands or 3 different companies doing different things. What was the motivation for, again, all those irons in the fire between filters and security and frame brand as well?
Yeah, I think that therein lies the thing. Each of them have their own independent audience. So I, as an entrepreneur, and I think it's important to segregate those audiences to help understand that's exactly why I'm doing it, right? So each of the businesses, so Signal is the original business that I had created now nearly 20 years ago. And the focus was to leverage franchise ownership and technology to provide a better service, essentially for less annually, to the client. Right. And that was the solution. And we would deliver predominantly patrols and a security officer. So really only 2 choices there. Over time, what we continue to develop is that technology became a platform that can be used for many different organizations. So I'll give an example, and it's one people can identify with. In 1971, McDonald's, and if you watch the founder story, that was a movie produced that Michael Keaton was in, it shows how McDonald's created a very systemized process that did create an efficient way to deliver the goods. But what they couldn't do is get more cars through the process because of the nature of the ordering. And so in 1971, they were doing $100 million a year, and they had required all their franchisees to get on a point of sale system. And that's essentially now what we know. You go to the drive-through window, they're pushing in a kiosk, and then everybody knows to make their burger and their fries, et cetera. And the order has now gone from 20 minutes down to 90 seconds, because at the time it was a drive-in, now it's a drive-through. Right. And so through this system that we've evolved our technology, we now have a mobile point of sale system for B2B businesses. And that's the platform that is now the security framework I'm using for security can be used for all franchisors. Right. So anybody that has a remote business, you're driving it around a truck, think of it, the software works much like Uber, right? Whereas before, the taxi cab process was super inefficient. Franchising still is the taxi cab process. You're waving them down, trying to get a hold of people, inefficient. We're essentially Uber, exclusively a technological app, or Amazon Prime, right? It just delivers without talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. So that's the security software. That's the software that's in Frame Brand. And so we're offering that to other franchisors to make their business efficient and profitable. And so the first platform we're launching on that is FilterGo. Right. So now you can have your filters change without interacting with a tech or anybody else. And it's super efficient, which drives down cost dramatically. That is, 1, making a margin for the franchise owner, but 2, saving money for the customer, because, every business is charging for their time effectively. Even if their time's inefficient, they're charging for their time because that's how they make money.
And I think, number one, I like Gusty, because I looked at the website and I don't know where Gusty came from or whose idea that was, but Gusty is pretty cool to have the, as part of FilterGo. But the idea of filters is such a fascinating one to me, because symbolically, you didn't think about it until COVID happened.
Right.
Right. And then now that everyone's worried about air quality and air purity. And so a filter is like, of course, filters need to be changed. And filters are important and air purity is important. And we don't think about it until something significant happens that draws our attention to this thing, which now becomes not just a source of convenience, but possibly a source of life and death.
Right. And at the same time, it's an inconsequential cost, right? I mean, we changed the filter for $30, right? So it's inconsequential. And you're like, do I really want to risk my life, to your point, if that is the case, for $30, or whatever? No. And then it's inconvenient. And quite frankly, it's something you don't think about. And that's the other benefit is like, I keep forgetting about it because it's just on my to-do list and I forgot to do my to-do. And back to your Gusty comment, when we were building our branding, it's super critical to say, what is our market position and what would appeal to that? And one of the things that stood out was all our competitors have boring dominated, right? I mean, they've dominated every corner of boring. I mean, if we painted a map of boring, all our competitors' brands would be there. So let's be the exact opposite. And I think we see that in society as saying sometimes, swimming upstream is what gets you the attention, not being another fish swimming downstream. And that's what Gusty is doing. And so if you look at our color palette, you look at our fun approach, that's really leaning into being the opposite and doing so in a way. And if you're going to have a service that's pretty straightforward, make it fun. Why not? I mean, I think, Savannah Bananas is a great example of that. How do we make baseball fun? Is we just make a little thing. It's still recognizable as baseball, but they add a little elements. That's what Gusty does for us. That's what our Filter Go, branding elements are, is to make it a little bit of fun of something that's relatively routine.
I just had this conversation, but it was an academic context because I'm on a committee around internships and for-credit internships. And there was a shell syllabus was developed that could be used across all departments for internships. Fine. And I looked at it and my comment was to somebody, how could we make this more boring? Because there's nothing in this document anywhere that gets anybody excited about anything. It reads like like somewhere in between a legal contract and some kind of instructions on how to use something like a toaster, right? It's just so boring. And if we're excited, then we need to put that excitement in there because there's no reason for them to get excited reading this document or interacting with it.
I think you bring up a super important point in this day and age we're in now, because AI is going to it's naturally above average. So it's going to create above average content. You take all the content, it's going to use an algorithm to say above average content would be X.
Right.
And you take away the exceptionally creative, right? If we go look at all the people we pay to buy tickets for, right? And they're the exceptionally creative, right? I mean, you can go back and look at the innovators that were changed. I mean, essentially Elvis Presley was the original founder of rock and roll. Why? Because he was creative with a new device.
Right.
Instead of taking what was old and bringing it above average, right? And that's where I think we take away creativity in that instance. And I think I would tell your audience to lean into that and say, what can I do to be exceptional, not to be boring? And I think those documents are boring, and say, hey, let's make that, totally obscure. And that'll appeal to a different audience because the boring audience is covered.
Well, I think, and you're going back to education, and this goes into your book and the idea about training, next generations and things like that. We don't necessarily encourage creativity because with that comes risk. And so especially students will be like, well, I don't want to take the risk because then my grade will go down. Tell me what I need to do and then I'll do it. So they're good at replication, but they're not necessarily good at creativity because that's not something that's built into the evaluation and into the process.
And that's what the slow decline of America is, right? We were a country built on entrepreneurs.
Right.
I look back and all the immigrants here, like I'll tell my, longstanding family story, but in late 1800s, my great grandfather immigrated here. Okay. And he was one of four boys, and he was the only one that immigrated here. And I can tell you, I went back to Arvag in Switzerland where he came from, and that was all gone. The acreage they were farming by hand there was no more land. It was just not feasible. And so he took a great risk, only saw his mother one other time in his entire life, leaving at 18 years old. And so they were risk takers. We were a country full of risk takers, just like that. They created the world. Right. And go to the early 1800s. Look at our economy compared to European economies. Wasn't there. The only reason we're the biggest economy in the world is because of all the risk takers.
Right.
And so now, and creative people, right? I think there's one thing we export, and that is our media and news and information. Why? Because we are by far the most creative with regard to content, right? That we're sending out music and narratives and all that stuff. But now we're telling people, don't be creative anymore. Don't take risks. That's inherently is the heart of America, with the original people that came here as our forefathers, and we're telling them not to do that. We don't need a bland Europe. That's got covered. There's 600 million people over there that aren't creative. We don't need more of those. And there's pockets of people that are creative. I'm not saying the whole society,
right.
But as a culture, they're oppressed to stay, don't do anything that stands out or will, hammer you down as the nail that stood up. And we need to lean into that and say, in fact, this is the part of our roots of America, is the land of opportunity, and opportunity by nature has risk.
It's interesting you mentioned your immigration story, because I taught a class on immigrant entrepreneurship. It's a class I created because my dissertation work was around immigrant entrepreneurship. And one of the theories of why certain immigrant groups are more entrepreneurial than others, like my ethnic background is Lebanese, Arab American, and there's very entrepreneurial. And so, or Greeks, you talked about Greeks, entrepreneurial. Is that the cultural, number one, the characteristics, the personalities of people who leave, the risk takers. Number two, is there a tradition in the culture that promotes the idea of going out on your own? And the more you lose that, the more you lose that kind of spark to lead to differentiation, discovery, innovation, and moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, the Greeks, and let's say the Lebanese, maybe too, I can't speak to your culture, but they were looking at opportunity as an advancement instead of an opportunity as a last resort, right? I think you're seeing a trend in franchising. You say, I can't find a job, so I'm going to buy a franchise. Instead of a first resort saying, I can't work here anymore, I'm going to buy a franchise, right? And it's the same outcome, different orientation.
Right.
So are you seeing people taking a risk as a last resort, which is usually the bad thing, or as an opportunity you're pursuing? And I think that's truly a mentality and orientation. And I was always saying, I'm going to take the opportunity, the risk, proactively, not reactively. And I think that's so hard. And we have oriented people like, only when you have to take a risk, take it. No, take a risk because you're taking one by not taking it.
Right.
The risk by not taking a risk, that is also has a risk. It's the omission as opposed to commission, and your life will be, less meaningful if you don't take risks in it.
One of the great stories I heard was from actually a Maronite priest that I knew. And he said, when Lebanese came into places like Pennsylvania or coal country, they were going there to work in the coal mines and quickly discovered that working in the coal mines is not great. And so they said, what else can we do? And he said, so they started selling bananas to coal miners. And he's like, do you know why they sold bananas to coal miners? And I'm like, no. It's like, it's the only fruit, one of the only foods you can eat where you don't get it dirty when you hold it. Because of the peel, right? You don't need the peel. You're holding it by its own wrapper, right? I was like, nice. Yeah, I'm like Lebanese, right? So it goes into this, what's the opportunity space available? Sure. How can I creatively engage in it? Because I want to see, it's an opportunity that I want to take, not because I'm necessarily forced into it as a last resort. I think it's an important distinction, is this spark to do something versus a fear of, something else.
So then, given that you're in academia, I think calculated risk is a much better, that's what you're going to educate people on, because blind risk is foolish.
Right.
So where do we calculate the risk? And I think the reason people make mistakes is they're self-oriented. I love doing this. What's my passion? What do I care about? Instead of what does the world need?
Right.
And so if you look at where I built the brands, each and every one of them, I built them around gaps I saw in industries that the world needed. I quite frankly, wasn't a security person before, nor do I really care about filters. But I see gaps in those two areas that could be better served. And then fundamentally, if you're building a business or taking a risk, if it does not save time and money, and it only saves one or the other, you increase your risk. If it saves time and money, you have a much higher probability. And if you listen to Jeff Bezos, he will say, I'm in the business of saving time and money. And that is driving products because people pay for convenience, right? I'll give an example. So back to my family heritage, they became farmers and they knew what they were going to eat 6 or 9 months in advance, right? Because they were planting it.
Right.
Right now, your quick service and drive-through world is because I'm going to decide what I'm going to eat about 30 minutes beforehand. Right. And that is, it was efficiency and choices, right? It goes back to that saves time and money to go through there. I don't have to go prepare food. I don't have to go buy it. I don't have to plant it. I don't have to harvest it, right? It's super time and money. And so that's where, the convenience of those items have accelerated that dramatically, and because it saves time and money, but we're still eating. My ancestors ate and I eat. But the difference is the efficiency it takes to get that completed. And that's where, if you're building a business and you want to calculate a risk, do where there's a gap in the marketplace and do it to save time and money. And then you already now calculated a risk and confirm and validate that at a high level, you can do both of those. Save time and money in an industry you can disrupt.
I was just teaching my students yesterday or Wednesday how to do journey mapping. And one of the things that I said to them is, you're not just looking for what's there, you're looking for what's not.
Right.
Look for the gaps, look for the openings, look for the absences, and see how you can fill those spaces. Those gaps are opportunities to fill with creative ideas to make things better for people.
Well, and here's the other thing with journey mapping. People start where it's at and they try to remap instead of start where it should be.
Right.
And that's a key part. You're saying, here's the path we're already doing, so let's just enhance it slightly like this.
Right.
Instead, you say your ideal customer. I'll give a very, very specific example. That's Uber. They said, what would be an ideal from point A to point B driving experience?
Right.
I literally want to know when I'm getting picked up and when I'm getting dropped off. Instead of saying, how do we enhance the cab experience?
Right.
They're saying, and so there was no cabs anymore. You've eliminated that. And you said, okay, who's going to be the closest to pick them up? Probably another driver that's right in the area. Look at how many cars are going up and down the road on a daily basis. Right. And they could just pick somebody up in a commute to work, and they basically mapped it that way. And they mapped the journey experience, and then they built the technology to support that.
Right.
Not taking, here's all the problems we have. Let's just fix one at a time and build out an experience there. And then it's a hodgepodge of things that never really materially work.
A real quick story about Uber. I was in Moscow. I was teaching in Moscow, coming back and forth to the United States. And I was there with a couple other people. And really early in the morning, we needed to take a cab to the airport. Our cab didn't show up. So we're standing on this street really early in the morning, no cab, wondering what to do. And this young lady drives by and stops in her car. She's like, where are you going? In English, we're going to the airport. Get in, I'll take you. And I said, well, why are you doing this? She was a college student. And she's like, well, I'm just looking to make some extra money for my 21st birthday party so I can throw a party. So I'm just going around driving people to make extra money. That was before I ever heard of Uber.
Right, exactly.
And I was like, I don't know what she's doing now. She was actually majoring in like IT or in, information architecture or something like that. But I was like, oh my God. And then I come back and Uber starts to be a thing. I'm like, well, there you go. There's the gap. And there's the opportunity that she saw to be able to make extra money because she had providing a service that she could go out there and do.
Yeah, and that's an entrepreneur. And if you look at Russia, they were an oppressed society, right? So they're looking at that's out of desperation, right? There's no other opportunity. That's the desperation risk taking versus the opportunistic. And I think when you see immigrants that come here, back to your comments earlier, is they're the ones that see the opportunity here because they see the oppression where they're at and they value the opportunity. We have become empathetic to that here in America as a long-standing American because we're like, I see opportunity everywhere, so I'm not going to take any of it.
Right.
And the other countries say, I see opportunity nowhere, so I'm going to go find it. And that's always the ones that are more likely successful.
So what led to the book idea? I mean, because you're busy, the lead exponentially, because I know you have 2 books. Mm-hmm. What led to this idea that, I want to put this down on paper to share with other folks?
Yeah, I think it really started with even why I'm doing this podcast, right? Because I realized that throughout my career, I've had opportunities that I didn't ever have. And I'll go back to that immigrant story. I had a generational, someone took a risk, and I feel responsible to not let them down, even though they're long since deceased, the risk they took to capitalize on that, because they gave me the opportunity to live in America versus an area where I have freedom and opportunity to build a business that has, been able to produce, returns for my family and coworkers. So now I need to develop on the next generation how to do that. And, when I first started working at Black & Decker, like you mentioned, I had a manager come along and said, hey, here's the things you need to learn. And kind of mentor. That doesn't happen anymore. Nobody comes alongside a worker and helps mentor them. In fact, they're probably afraid to say anything because they'll be held accountable for that. So they don't develop them, even if it's harsh words and saying, hey, you're really not good at communicating. And then they get a letter written, my boss was mean to me. Yeah, no, I think he was honest with you, actually. And so that's why they don't even say those comments and they find any reason to say that back to them. And so then I'm saying, how else does this next generation find to improve? And it's through content like this. Right. That they hear a conversation, say, this could be applicable to my life and I can change. And so then I said, okay, that's just a piece of content. Right. So they may listen to this podcast, Gary, and then go back and say, I should try to remember to apply this, but I don't know how. And
Right.
instead, what a book is effectively a recipe. Right. So if this is a piece of content that says next time you have chicken, marinated beforehand, right? And you're like, yeah, I should do that. Oh, I totally forgot, because there was a tip I heard Gary say and I totally forgot. A book is effectively a recipe. And so the Transform Through Purpose is a recipe on how to identify what your purpose is and how to transform your life and others' lives through that purpose. Then the next step, it kind of a sequel to that of sorts, is the Lead Exponentially, saying now you're already leading. You know your purpose. You've clarified your purpose. You have an organization that you're leading. How do you help the next generation develop their leadership, or those managers that are coming underneath you, or as you're carrying that forward? And how do you invest in them to come alongside them that you didn't have before? And so that led the second book. And that's the second recipe, saying,
Right.
based upon my career and where I've been, here's the recipe that effectively I've used, that I've seen others take and adopt and use to be successful, that really want to change their lives. And, this book isn't going to be a global bestseller and millions of things, because people don't care about being better, to be honest. And I'm going to challenge your audience here. I wake up each and every day, and I say this: you have a choice as an audience member, or even as a person. You can live the default life. That's a life that when you wake up that morning, you have no idea what you're going to do. And you just wait till somebody calls you, an email comes in, or you get a phone call or a text, and you start defaulting to that. And then don't complain in 20 years when you have a default life results.
Right.
Or you can choose today to say, you know what? I decided at the very least I don't want to live a default life. So I better find a place that I'm going to invest and walk diligently to that. Now, we'll say the default life is easy daily. It's hard long term. Right? Because at the long term, you're like, wow, I'm still in the same place I've toiled with for the last 30 years. And now what? But short term, it's really easy. I can do whatever I want today, and that's fun. That's easy, right? But on the life on purpose, it's going to be hard at the front end, but way better long term, right? You're going to feel confident. You're going to have a purpose. You're going to have a sense of self. You're going to have others that your family members are going to follow in your footsteps, and you'll see that long term. And so that is the reason I do the content and write the book, is so they can live that life long term that they really want, instead of the short term they're pursuing at the moment.
One of the things I think is important in that message that I've been talking with other educators about is education has been changing in many ways, is the importance of introducing purposeful friction into experiences and journeys, right? That we don't want, unintentional friction or valueless friction that just makes things harder for no reason. But we do want things to be hard to have people grow, because we grow through friction, whether it's lifting weights, whether it's training for a marathon, or whether it's through education. Challenging oneself is friction. And it's how we learn to deal with that friction and grow through it that makes us ready for the next challenge. And that frictionless is not necessarily helping anybody.
I could not agree more. I am directly where I'm at because I was challenged, not coddled.
Right.
If I'm coddled, I get worse every day, right? I become entitled, and enabled. But if I'm challenged, I have a choice. And now that requires two things. One, someone to challenge me. Someone has to challenge me. Number two is I have to respond to the challenge, right? And so both of those things need to happen in order for us to be challenged. And so if you're someone that is being challenged by someone or something else, then respond to the challenge. Take it, go for it, do it. That's your choice. And if you're someone that loves to grow, challenge someone, and then they will spur you on as well, right? I mean, we watch. I love watching competition, and no one is there because they won every game without ever having any competition along. No, they won a lot of tightly close games or matches or meets, and they got it progressively better. And even if they lost some, they learned what they did wrong, and they made improvements as a direct result. And so those are all super, super critical things for life. Exactly what you're saying. Let's not make things easier. Let's make them harder. And if they're harder, let's not quit. Because people quit so easily now, and that's to their own personal detriment. People think they're quitting on me. No, they're quitting on themselves. That's what I tell them. Right. Sorry, I got to quit. You're quitting on yourself. Decide today that you quit on yourself, and then go forward. There's this great story that I remember. And there's this guy that was out with his dad. And his dad was a trash. He picked up his trash in Detroit, and a bag ripped, and it was freezing cold. The ice had frozen. Some drink had spilled. The ice had frozen. He pulled the black bag, and the trash had spilled. And he picked up some of the goods and got in the car. And the dad said, "You're not done." He's like, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's more trash that's there." And he said, "It's Dad. It's cold. I'm not going to do it. I'm 14. I don't want to do it. It's not me." And he said, "Okay, I just want to know that you tell me today's the day you quit on yourself." Because this is not about the customer. They'll never know. They'll understand. But you're going to get out and scrape up that ice and scrape those trash out of there and quit on yourself. And so the kid begrudgingly got in there, went out and scraped at that ice and got the trash out, got back in the car. And that kid was eventually Magic Johnson.
All right.
And he goes back to his story and he says, that was the day I knew that I am not quitting on anyone but myself. When I remember the story at 12, 13, 14 years old. And of course, he became an NBA champion. He's a billionaire because he had an early lesson that said, the easy route in freezing cold, the customers could understand, but I wasn't quitting. Then that was the day I was going to quit on myself and not deliver it. And that is the power of sticking through something that's hard.
Yeah, I was just had that conversation in one of my classes where I have students working on individual projects that are ideas that they're coming up with, and one student was kind of presenting his or talking about his, and I said, well, one of the things you all have to do is demonstrate that whatever idea you have, that's not just your opinion, that there's actual backing to it, that there's a you can show the why of why it's a good idea.
Right.
And as I was going through it, he stopped and said, so you're telling me I should change topics? And I said, no, I'm telling you should fight for yours.
Yeah,
right. Don't try to imagine what I want you to do. Your job is to tell me that what you want to do is worth doing. And you need to communicate that to everybody.
And I think that's the other thing is this mentality around compliance.
Right.
Right. It's like, I just want what you want me to do for this semester, teacher, so I can get an A.
Right.
And then you'll go be compliant to the next person that's asking you to do something. Pretty soon you're going to find a bad actor that is asking you to be compliant and you do it. Instead of independent thinking, right? That's what you're saying. Be an independent thinker and be able to defend your independent thoughts.
Exactly. And
that's all I'm asking, right?
Yeah. And my job, as I tell them, is not to teach you what to think. It's to teach you the process of thinking so that you can form your own thoughts and be able to support your ideas in a way that is compelling and convincing. Go back to your communication point, right? That no one's going to buy what you're telling them just because you said it.
Right.
You have to be able to articulate it in a way that's convincing. Yeah. Let's work on that, whatever it is you're working on. And I think that, this idea of leading exponentially and getting the next generation to be there, it's, how do we get the next generation to be able to do that, given the challenges they're going to be facing, which are going to be unique to them around technology and around the changing workplace?
Yeah. And I think, going back to your sociology background, challenges are always going to happen. But our approach can be super consistent, right? I mean, I look out throughout my life, regardless of what's been there, I've always gone in with a curious mind. That's repeatable. Saying, why did someone else decide to do this, right? At some point or day, right? For example, a foot was decided, because of that was the unit of measure.
Right.
It wasn't any other thing other than it was someone's foot length and they would walk it off. And that became a unit of measure that is now universally used. Okay, if we understand that, that clarifies a lot of things, right? I'll give another, this is one I often say, there's that colloquialism, lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? And we hear that. Well, the etymology of that was when people were riding horses and they were thirsty, if the horse drank the water, was okay for a human to drink it. But if you force them to drink it, they will not drink water that'll make them sick. So there was some real value there. Right. That you didn't throw up and get dysentery or whatever because you drank water you couldn't do. Have your horse try it first. That was your water tester. I mean, it's just super simple things. And that's what someone was doing. And that's became now something we use in our natural language as a result of that. So the goal of the book is then for current generations or people who are looking to become leaders of how to develop your authentic leadership style and approach and how to translate that into practical action to accomplish whatever goals you have. Sure. Ideally, I would love a leader to take this, have a team they're developing, and that team then be able to take leadership roles that they've developed and subsequently all the way through, right? And that's how society's been advanced. Every year I just read a study that this generation is now the next in America, the one that is not going to be smarter or more diligent than the previous generation.
I've seen that.
I'm sure you're dealing with that as an educator. And as a result, how do we do that? And so I said, that's not everybody, right? That's a blanket statement. I believe there's maybe 1 in a million, that wants to be better than the previous generation.
Right.
Maybe some of you actually care to be better. Somebody like, we're doomed. Okay, this content's not for you. But if you're saying, actually, I don't want to be the moron that everybody says I am, how do I get better? This content's for you, right? If you actually want to be better in life and you aren't just taking the default or handouts and you feel like, how do I get better? This is a recipe that's there not to make you feel better, but to be better. And there's a huge difference there, because feeling better means take the easy default life. Being better requires work and effort. So if you want to be better, you physically want to require the work and effort. This content's for you. Lead Exponentially will help you lead yourself and others better. And then, but it require work.
Well, one final question I have to ask, given where you're in Omaha and I'm from Michigan. I don't like the fact that University of Nebraska is in the Big Ten. It doesn't feel right to me. Nothing against Nebraska, nothing against the University of Nebraska. I don't like that, University of Oregon's in the Big Ten.
Right.
I don't know what your feelings are on the matter, but I don't like it.
Yeah. So I think it's not even about I think you're going to see a handful of people. It's all about the revenue generated, right? So
right.
I think the Big Ten wanted Nebraska, and I remember when that happened, because it gets a better TV deal, because Nebraska does have a solid football or has
right, of course,
following, and of course we're doing much better in basketball as well, and volleyball for that matter, among other things. So I think that was the case. And in addition to that, it's really about economics and TV deals, and so I think we can look at that as a fan and drive the result, but ultimately economics drive a lot of decisions. That's also dovetails with sociology. And one of my minors is economics, and I said, economics follows sociology and sociology follows economics. They really are almost hand in hand, and you can't bifurcate the two. And if you're looking at it from a sociological standpoint only and not an economic standpoint, it won't make sense. If you're looking at it from an economic standpoint and you don't look at it as sociology, it won't make sense. You really have to look at the two together. So that would be my answer to you, is saying, regardless of what I want as a human, I think economically there. And then as a result, we're both better, because, the distribution of those resources, maybe not in Michigan necessarily because they already had their income coming in, but certainly as far as recruiting for Nebraska, we're a small state. It does help us with exposure for recruiting purposes and economics. And so I would say that if you look at the two together, it makes sense. But as a sociological fan, where we had the original Big 12 that we were in, or even the Big 8, if you go back that far, that's where your allegiances lie. But, people quickly forget to.
Well, it's like I can get Nebraska because Midwest, Nebraska, sure. And there was something about the Big Ten being like Midwest, right? There was an identity with the brand. There was something that connected. I didn't go to Michigan or Michigan State. I went to Central Michigan. It was a MAC-10 school. It was a MAC conference. But the idea of Oregon being in the Big Ten is like, that's not the Midwest. It's not even close. Yeah. That's the West Coast. That's not us. They're not us. It's not who we are. And I think that's my problem, is just because the brand, going back to the brand discussion, the brand meant something about the identity.
Yeah.
And football was this. Well, now what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything, because you got places from Rutgers on one side of the country to West Coast schools on the other side of the country.
Yeah. And I think, again, you can make an economic decision that dilutes the value of the brand, right?
Yeah.
And I'll use another example. At Chick-fil-A, if they were open on Sundays, would their brand be built, or would it be diluted?
Right.
Economically, it would make sense for them to be open on Sundays, but their brand would be diluted. And then ultimately they would, I think, actually sales would decline, because it takes away the exclusivity. And that's the point that was there. I mean, if you look at the Ivy League schools, let's use that as an example. If you started letting anything that put Ivy on the front of their brick buildings, I mean, then maybe that's the condition now.
Right.
Then they're an Ivy League school, right?
Right.
You've diluted the value of an Ivy League school, right? And that's the to your point on the other side. And so we have to recognize that as part of the brand. What is going to add to our brand, and what is going to dilute our brand? Right. Another cautionary tale in that brand is Krispy Kreme. They offer their donuts everywhere, and they were no longer exclusive. And so they were ubiquitous, and nobody wanted them. And so that's another cautionary tale, and they're in financial duress as a result. So you got to really manage your brand accordingly. And that's in every sense, whether it's an individual or a business.
And the brand experience, and this is where Starbucks went into the trouble, because they diluted their experience, which was in store, which was a cafe kind of experience. And when they diluted that experience, it also diluted the identity of the brand and resulted in, well, it's just another coffee place. Why do I go there for expensive coffee? I'll go someplace else. So it stopped being special and started being just like everywhere else.
And I think if this is just an individual, that's where if you're like everyone else, that's the same thing. And I'm saying what is different actually is not what you wear or how you do your hair, but your ideology, mindset. That's where it all drives all that. The hair and clothing, which are easy to change, are a byproduct of your ideology. And so be different in your ideology. And what does that mean? That you don't accept complete compliance everywhere. right? I was joking about this with someone in the office the other day. I said, I don't do a 2-second stop at a stop sign. Right. I mean, that's compliance, even if it's an innocuous one. And they're really like 1, 2. Why? Because some driver's ed person told me to one time, right, when I was 15 years old.
Right.
And it's like someone put that stop sign up there and it might be just one car going down the street or no cars there. And so, those are the things that are there, is saying, wait a minute, why are we compliant? Understand, why are we compliant? What are we compliant for? And I've said this for a long time. The rules that are put in place are to keep the person that put them there in power. And I use this as an example, and we're going to go a little faith context here. But the first commandment is you should have no other gods before me. God believes that. His first rule is charge, and every, government, every leader puts compliant mechanisms in place to keep themselves in power, right? Go look throughout history. And if you see the collapse of societies, it's because the ruler was basically making every ruler to keep themselves in power.
Right.
And ultimately, that is then stay compliant to keep me in power. That's what they're asking you to do. And then your question is, should this person be in power? That's the innovative question to ask. And as a leader, you could say, one, why would they choose to follow me if I'm not forcing them to? Compliance. And then who would I follow if I had a choice?
Right.
And so that's what Lead Exponentially is about. Be a leader worth following and give someone the choice to follow. And then if you are going to have people, why would they choose to follow you? Right. And so those are the things that are there. And compliance is not a solution.
Well, go back to sociology before we wrap up. Within all acts of deviance is some element of innovation. All innovators are deviant because otherwise they would just be following the norms.
That's right. Exactly.
So not only just be the leader, but be a leader who encourages some amount of deviance that leads to innovation.
That's right.
Because when people stop questioning authority, they fall into compliance. And when they fall into compliance, we stop moving forward.
That's exactly right. And that's where the society potentially is at, unless we decide to do something different. So transform through purpose, lead exponentially, and then we'll begin to push society forward. And that'll be critical for the next generation.
Well, Reed, this is awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your thoughts, your books, and the University of Nebraska football and other sports and everything in between.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing your audience receive this content and change their lives.
I want to thank Reed Nyffler for joining me to talk about leadership, entrepreneurship, creativity, and, more importantly, Nebraska football. You can find out more about his work, his companies, his books in the links in the show notes. As always, you can share feedback on this episode or any episode at feedback@experiencexdesign.com. You can also share ideas, suggestions, potential guests, or anything else you want to share at that email address as well. So don't be shy, go ahead and use it. And if you want to subscribe and join the EXD community and be part of the EXD newsletter, while you're over at the website, experiencexdesign.com, you can give me your email and I'll make sure to keep you in the loop on all the exciting news, including the book that is in development. It's coming, folks. The draft is almost done. It's going to be happening. More on that soon. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support the cost of doing it by buying me a coffee. Any contribution is helpful and very much appreciated. So head over to experiencexdesign.com and buy me a coffee. If you're not ready to buy me a coffee, maybe you want to hire me to help out your corporation or your organization in the experience design area. If you need a speaker with humor, insight, charisma, and who is easy to work with, and you can't find that person, then pick me. That's a joke. I actually am pretty easy to work with. You know me from the podcast, but you can also have me as a keynote speaker, a moderator, a host, or a trainer, whether that be virtual or in person. You can check out my speaking profile at garyconnects.com. Topics include things like workplace communities, employee-centric cultures, the idea of how to create experience research and data strategy, and so much more. So head over to garyconnects.com and let me know how we can work together. You can shoot me a message at gary@garyconnects.com or DM me through LinkedIn. And with that, as always, be kind, be safe, be well, and be here for the next Experience by Design. Bye.